Let's see, where to begin? First of all, I will say, of all my stalkers after the march, there are many. It's strange what happens. Colin was the most persistent, so I'm here. I'm here. Madison got me right before you, and then here I am, but they started stalking me before the march. How do I begin? I want to talk about the march in my, there's no flat surfaces, see? I want to talk about the march, I want to talk about the political moment we're in. You seem like you've got chutzpah. In 30 minutes, throw something at me, okay? Soft. So look at your watch, okay? That means I'll begin to wind things down around that. Because I want to open this up to discussion. I do want to get to talk about the political moment we're in. I want to talk about the march, but I want to talk about the book and the politics that are in that as best I can. And say a few words. Actually, I will say something about the march right off the bat, because how many people here went to the march, the National Equality March 2 weeks ago? How many people here were aware that it was taking place? Okay, good. Was that before or after, for the most part? Before, raise your hand. After, raise your hand. Okay, so you guys in the group here did an excellent job. The march organized, of course, with the established gay organizations, what I like to refer to as Gay Inc., in opposition to it from the very beginning, although some of them came on board later so that they could then claim it if it were a success, which it was, so now they're doing fundraising off of it. Okay, that's to be expected of opportunists. But with the gay press largely opposed to the march, with all the establishment, including the sort of gay establishment figures, Barney Frank, key among them, a man who has been exceedingly busy shoveling cash to banks over the last several months in this sort of no banker left behind government that we're living under right now. And of course he is the openly gay congressman from Massachusetts. And I was thinking, when I stood there on Capitol Hill, I've been on many, many marches, but I had never been at the stage of one. Usually socialists are good enough to build marches and then are tossed to the side when it comes to actually speaking in marches. That did not happen this time. This was a total grassroots effort from soup to nuts. But it was fascinating. We had no idea that it was going to draw 250,000 people. There's no accounting for that in terms of the organizational forces that went into mobilizing for the march. It simply struck a political chord, which I'll talk about later. But I think that having pushed for full equality now, instead of the sort of incrementalist, sort of state by state, issue by issue, gradualist approach that has been bankrupt over the last decades, that really hasn't won us very much and gotten us very far, it was really it was really the right call at the right time. And when we stood up there, I stood there with Cleve Jones, who was Harvey Milk's collaborator, who I only got to know in the organizing towards this march. And we stood there in front of the Capitol, which is in fact on a hill, and as this sort of carpet of humanity came at us that was just absolutely mammoth. We had no idea until that moment how exceedingly large this was when we saw hundreds of thousands of people marching at us, and our just jaws are dropped open and staring at this thing. And the first thing that we could think to say to each other, after having been denounced for weeks and weeks, Barney Frank kept getting on the television set and saying, the only thing they're going to put pressure on is the grass. And, this is a waste of time. Why are they marching? The only thing we could think to say as we saw these hundreds of thousands of people marching towards the Capitol was, Barney Frank, fuck you. And we found out later that was the lead chant on the student contingent. So, if anything tells you about this moment, there is a posture of defiance right now, a sense that we can win this, that we will win this, that we're going to organize, that we're going to fight, and that we're not going to listen to the establishment figures who tell us that we can't have full equality in all matters covered by civil law in all 50 states. I want to say a few words about the book right now. If you are a fan of reading a sort of complicated, incomprehensible prose, the kinds of books where the words sort of clop across the page on little wooden feet, you will not like this book. So don't buy this book. This is not for you. If you want one of those books, I can suggest many. I don't know why so many books written about sexuality are so deadly boring and written in impenetrable language, but they are. But I felt that there needed to be something that was fast-paced, something that actually connected with a generation of people who have grown up with one set of expectations and yet are delivered something quite different. I see no reason why we can't write about sexuality and history and politics and theory without peppering in a few words about clitoral orgasms, lesbian porn, and fist fucking. It is about sex, after all. It's not a manual. So I did that, and I did it for $12 because I wanted this to be accessible to people who don't have huge wealth and who need to read books about where we go from here and how we got to this place that we're in right now. There did not exist a book-length sort of history, political, and theoretical work from an unabashedly socialist perspective on this topic. Until now, there are many excellent histories and excellent political essays out there, but there had not been something that took on the totality from my point of view. And I wanted to specifically take up, and I want to raise some of these questions here because I won't have time to get into them in the course of this talk. I want to read a few brief passages from the book to give you a flavor of it. But I wanted to talk about the roots of LGBT oppression because there is often a presumption that this is just something that exists for all time. It's super historical. It's always been there, and therefore it will always be there. I wanted to talk about how a movement that exploded onto the streets of Lower Manhattan in 1969. I mean, actually, there were, of course, movements prior to that, and I talk about that from the late 19th century into the early 20th century in this country. But, of course, the modern movement explodes onto the streets of Lower Manhattan with the Stonewall Riots in 1969. How it went from that to essentially becoming a much neutered, often passive, backroom dealing sort of market niche. And what are the politics and the history of that? What accounts for the rise of this sort of very curious creature known as the homocon? You know, these sort of conservative, gay, usually men, not always, who CNN always seems to call whenever they want to comment about what's going on among LGBT people. They find some white guy in a suit who has something vacuous to say. We're hoping that will change. And you people are part of making that happen, because I think it would be great for this new generation to be seen on television, on MSNBC and CNN and, God forbid, Fox. But they need to hear voices of what people who are not these sort of conservative elements within what is often referred to as our community. And I wanted to talk about what is the actual history of the left in this country and the theoretical underpinnings of that history towards the earlier gay liberation movement and the current LGBT movement. And I wanted to talk about that sort of what used to be referred to as the $64,000 question. I suppose today would be called the $1 billion question. And that is, how do we unite the oppressed and exploited to fight for an end to the kinds of exploitation and oppression that so many of us face? And I wanted to also discuss a question that doesn't get talked about very much, and that is, what is sexual liberation? We talk about civil rights, we talk about social justice issues, as we should, but the question of liberation sort of gets tossed aside or forgotten about as either a sort of hippy-dippy notion or just sort of so utterly impractical that it has no possible connection to our lives. So I raise that and discuss it at some length.